You've heard it said that there are two versions of every story. But what if you discovered that the Bible itself had an original version, one that had been hidden for thousands of years? What if the book of Genesis, was just an incomplete copy, carefully edited to protect religious interests? You might think it impossible that such a thing could have happened, but archaeological evidence, ancient manuscripts, and secret traditions suggest exactly that. An original Genesis scroll did exist, and it was deliberately buried because its contents were too dangerous. What could possibly be revealed in this manuscript that was so disturbing that it should be removed from the official scriptures? The truth is that before, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, there was an entirely different account of the beginning of creation. This original version was not a straightforward account, but it contained startling details about what existed before the creation of man. It spoke of ancient celestial beings, worlds destroyed and recreated, and events so shocking that they could shake established faith to its core. For this reason, throughout history, religious authorities have chosen to hide this original version, not out of malice, but out of fear. They feared that if the public had access to such a detailed and contradictory narrative, the authority of the scriptures would be questioned, creating dangerous and uncontrollable doubts among the faithful. They believed it was safer to offer a simplified version, a direct and clear account that could be easily taught and accepted without deep questioning. Thus it was that the original scroll was buried, forgotten, and nearly lost forever. But time is a great revealer of secrets. Recently, fragments and references from this first scroll have begun to emerge from caves near the Dead Sea, in ancient texts preserved by Jewish sages, and even in secret traditions passed down through generations. Now, finally, we are faced with the real possibility of understanding exactly why these texts were hidden. What did they say that could change everything we believe about God, about man, and about the origin of the universe? What if this truth was buried just so that you would never know it? If this makes sense to you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. And comment below, did you already suspect that there was something hidden at the beginning of the Bible? I really want to know what you think about this. According to these forgotten accounts, the first scroll of Genesis described a creation that began not with light, but with noise, conflict, and trial. It was not a soft word that brought the universe into existence, but a fragmented sound followed by movements and commands that clashed with each other. God was still the creator, but his action came after a cycle of cosmic imbalances caused by other spiritual entities that already inhabited previous realities. The text did not deny God. It simply showed that what we have as beginning was already the beginning of something older. This alone would be enough to make religious leaders of any era uncomfortable. Because if the earth was not the first plane of existence created, then man was not the beginning of history. He was the response to something. The traditional version of the Bible places man as the pinnacle of creation, but the original scroll portrayed him as a last-ditch attempt at spiritual balance. This would change everything: man's role, the origin of evil, and even the understanding of the fall. The creation of humanity would, in effect, be an effort to restore a broken order. Another element that caused concern in this forbidden manuscript was the presence of a being who attempted to create on his own. He was not initially depicted as an enemy. He was one of the first, the most beautiful, the closest to the source, but his mistake was to anticipate the divine will. He wanted to form something in his own image before the right time. This act caused spiritual disruptions so severe that dimensions had to be sealed, records erased, and the cycle of creation restarted. This figure, later associated with Lucifer, was seen in the scroll as an essential part of the celestial drama, not as the simplistic villain of the edited versions. And here's where it all starts to make sense. This scroll portrayed the creation of the earth not as an isolated act of glory, but as part of a forgotten spiritual war. And when religious leaders came across this account, they feared that it would undermine the people's trust in the scriptures they had established as sacred. Showing that God responded to previous events rather than starting from scratch was simply unacceptable. So the scroll was buried, sealed, and replaced with a cleaner, more controlled, and less dangerous text. This act of burying truth was not isolated. It has been repeated over the centuries. Whenever an ancient text threatened the official version of Scripture, it was eliminated or reinterpreted under the control of theologians and leaders. But in the case of the first scroll of Genesis, the order was more radical. No one else must see it. According to secret rabbinical traditions, it was kept in sacred places and sealed with 7 seals, not just physical, but spiritual. Only the most senior priests knew of its existence, and even among them, few dared to read it in its entirety. Among the fragments that have escaped time, there are mentions of beings called the primordial watchers, described as witnesses to the first creation. These beings are said to have observed the formation of the first physical plane and actively participated in the adjustments made to the universe after the first celestial rebellion. These are figures that never appear in the current Genesis. They are not the angels we know. They were considered fixed consciousnesses, entities that upheld the cosmic order and had the power to influence the cycles of creation and destruction. Their presence was removed to simplify the narrative. There is also a curious passage in one of the Gnostic texts that mentions a book of firsts, a manuscript that was given to Adam in Eden. According to this account, this book explained the entire sequence of events that led to the creation of the earth, including previous failures and the names of the spiritual beings involved. This artifact would be passed on to the patriarchs, but some of its contents would have been intentionally lost. The first scroll of Genesis would be the closest version of this book of firsts that ever physically existed, and it was hidden to protect the dogma. The existence of this scroll explains a number of gaps that many scholars notice when reading Genesis. Why does the Bible begin with God speaking, but without mentioning who or what was present before? Why is there a void described, but no explanation of its origin? Why does the earth already appear formless and void, as if it had experienced a previous disaster? All of this would make sense if we knew that the current Genesis is a continuation, not the beginning. The first scroll revealed this erased scene, the 0th chapter, that we were never allowed to read. This deliberate omission changed everything. By removing the most complex elements of creation, the leaders created a manageable but superficial narrative. Genesis became a theological summary rather than a comprehensive record of events. Thus, topics such as previous cycles of creation, celestial wars, and the existence of pre-Adamic beings were completely eliminated. Humanity was presented with a stripped-down, symbolic version, but not necessarily false, just incomplete, and like all half-truths, they serve their purpose but limit the deep understanding of spiritual reality. Other forgotten texts, such as the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, also mention events that occurred before the creation of man. They speak of previous falls, judgments in heaven, and even the formation of parallel worlds. These books were not included in the canon precisely because they reinforced the same idea that the original scroll presented, that there is a history that precedes history, a sequence of spiritual events that were hidden to protect the simplicity of popular faith and preserve the authority of religious institutions. Evidence of this manipulation is present even in the details of the current Genesis. For example, the text says that God created light on the first day, but only created the sun on the 4th. Where did this light come from? For many scholars, this is a vestige of a previous creation, where light was an entity or a living manifestation. The first scroll explained this clearly, describing that the primordial light was a conscious flow prior to matter. This type of statement would be impossible to sustain in a closed doctrine, and for this reason, it was excluded. From the version we know today, there are also indications that Eden was not the first environment created for spiritual beings. Ancient texts speak of a place of origin prior to the garden where entities of light lived. This place was destroyed after an internal rebellion and replaced by Eden as a new point of balance. According to the Forbidden Scroll, Adam was placed there not as the first, but as the first to be tested after previous mistakes. This completely changes man's position in creation. He would not be the beginning, but part of a sequence of attempts to restore lost harmony. This information, if revealed to the people in ancient times, would have caused chaos. Therefore, the preservation of faith required silence. The idea that the universe was born ready, perfect, with man at the center of everything, was easier to teach, safer. Showing a God who rebuilds, who reacts to previous cosmic failures, would require a spiritual maturity that few generations were ready to bear. The original scroll, then, was sealed, hidden from the eyes of the world. Only those who knew too much knew of its existence and swore never to reveal it. Most disturbingly, the contents of this scroll did not deny God, they magnified him. They showed a creator who does not impose but leads, who rebuilds patiently, who works in the midst of chaos to restore balance. The exclusion of this vision has taken away the depth of faith. The God presented in the official Genesis is grand but distant. The God of the forgotten scroll is involved, present in the details, even in the mistakes of the spiritual creatures that came before man. A God who, instead of starting from scratch, decided to rescue. Furthermore, the scroll described the existence of other records, books kept by the first created beings. These would have recorded the previous cycles of creation and fall. These texts would have been destroyed or sealed in spiritually inaccessible locations. The original Genesis scroll referred to these archives as mute witnesses of the former glory. The fact that the current sacred text makes no mention of these structures reinforces the suggestion that the narrative was carefully filtered to protect only that which reinforced accepted dogma. The consequence of all this is that we have been taught to see the beginning as absolute, when it was merely an intermediate chapter. The official Genesis begins with order, but ignores the trail of disorder that preceded it. It ignores the signs that the earth was formed within a larger context. And most important, it ignores that there is hidden knowledge that belongs to humanity, but that has been kept out of reach for reasons that we can now finally question. The forgotten scroll of Genesis does not contradict the faith. It deepens it, and that is why it was hidden. Many scholars believe that parts of this scroll still exist today, fragmented among the Dead Sea Scrolls, private collections and secret archives, belonging to religious institutions. But access to them is restricted. The parts released to the public never include the passages that contradict the traditional narrative. These documents remain locked away, catalogued with harmless codes, hiding within them insights into a universe older and more turbulent than the current Bible allows us to reveal. The fear of mass reactions is still real. Historical accounts indicate that some of this content was reviewed by ecclesiastical authorities at the beginning of the Christian period. Bishops and rabbis met to decide which texts would be accepted as inspired and which should be erased. The first scroll of Genesis was one of the first to be eliminated, as it contained elements considered dangerous to the unity of faith. Its language was too symbolic, and its concepts required a degree of interpretation that could open the door to heresies and questioning. Silence was considered the best option. But what exactly did these leaders fear? The answer lies between the lines of what survives. The first scroll spoke of a beginning amid ruin, of beings created before the light, of knowledge given to Adam and then taken away. Knowledge that showed man's role not as the sovereign of creation, but as a bridge between worlds. This undermines the central discourse of religious control, the idea that everything was made exclusively for man and that human error alone was responsible for the fall. According to this scroll, the fall began before man existed. These ideas lead us to an inevitable question. If the first Genesis was removed to protect religion, who is really ready to know it now? The rediscovery of this manuscript requires a break with old structures, with comfortable teachings, and with the fear of looking at something that has been buried for centuries. But perhaps it is precisely now, in a time of information and revelation, that the world is finally ready to hear the real story of the beginning. A story that, far from destroying faith, can take it to a depth never before reached. According to accounts preserved by secret rabbinical schools, the first scroll of Genesis also spoke of a language that predated the word. Before God said, "Let there be light," something was emitted, a sound, a vibrational flow that preceded the word. It was called in the texts the formless breath, a kind of living manifestation that activated creation without human language. This idea was removed from the current Genesis because it contradicted the doctrine of creation by direct word, so central to the Judeo-Christian tradition. But it opens up space for a deeper understanding of the divine essence. Another revelation contained in this scroll was about the division of light, not between day and night as we know it, but between two spiritual realms, a visible realm and a hidden realm. The visible light was supposedly placed in the current creation, while the hidden light was removed after the fall of a superior being. This division would explain why the world, even after creation, still contained darkness. What's more, according to this text, the redemption of humanity would involve the return of this hidden light, not just the forgiveness of sin. This view was considered too mystical and was completely erased from the official version. The scroll also spoke of a spiritual structure that predated Eden, a place called Divar, the space where God's thoughts took shape. It was there that the first meeting of higher consciousnesses took place, where a new plan to restore balance was decided. Eden was merely the practical application of that plan, a physical reflection of a higher reality. Adam's fall, therefore, was not an accident, but a foreseen step in a much larger chain of events. This would make sin something planned, which would be unacceptable according to traditional dogma. What is most surprising, however, is Adam's role in this manuscript. He was not created as a ruler, but as a witness. God formed him with the breath of memory to remember what had gone before. Adam carried fragments of the first plan within his being. But when he disobeyed, he not only lost immortality, he lost access to remembrance. The tree of knowledge was not just about good and evil, it was about revelation. When he ate of the fruit, he tried to recover by his own efforts what had been given as a gift, and that is why everything fell apart. From that fall onwards, the manuscript relates that humanity was enveloped in a kind of veil, a spiritual limitation that prevented it from accessing previous realities. This veil was not only a punishment, but also a protection. If fallen man had still been fully aware of the original structure, he would have gone mad. Therefore, the scroll said that the heavens were sealed by 7 layers and that only through progressive revelation, through the prophets and the Spirit, would it be possible to restore what had been lost. This concept of restoration by stages does not appear clearly in the current Genesis. Another part of the scroll described the existence of a mysterious object called the fiery eye. It was supposedly given to the primordial beings as an instrument of discernment, capable of separating what was divine will and what was independent creation. According to the text, this object was hidden after the rebellion, sealed beneath the foundations of the earth. Its existence was purposely omitted, as it revealed that creation could be corrupted by spiritual beings without man's involvement. This would nullify the teaching that sin and chaos began only with human disobedience. Furthermore, the scroll contained details about the creation of language. The first language, which predated Hebrew and Aramaic, was a language of form and vibration. It was through this language that the heavens communicated and that matter obeyed. This language was taken from the earth after the fall and fragmented into human sounds and syllables. The scroll stated that whoever understood this original language would have access to what it called the invisible structure of things. Religious leaders feared that this knowledge would escape their control and be used by the wrong hands, so they erased it completely from tradition. But the burning question is, why are we rediscovering this now? Why, after centuries, are fragments of the first scroll coming to light? Some believe that we are at a time when the veil will be lifted, that the greater plan of creation demands that humanity regain access to that which has been denied to it. Revelation comes not to destroy faith, but to purify it, to take control of the divine narrative out of human hands and restore the truth to its voice. The truth of the first Genesis. The truth that was buried but now cries out to be revealed. The return of this knowledge does not mean that the faith built up until now has been useless. On the contrary, everything we have learned so far has been a preparation, a necessary foundation so that we can now bear the full revelation. The first scroll of Genesis does not invalidate what came after. It fills in the gaps. It explains what was omitted, connects what seemed disconnected, and shows that the story of creation is much greater than we imagined, a story in which man is not just a creature, but a participant in an eternal plan. Those who hid this text knew what they were doing. They were afraid of the truth, not because it was wrong, but because it was too strong. Faith in those days needed simplicity. But today, in a world with access to knowledge like never before, truth is knocking at the door again, and it comes not as destruction, but as light. Revealing the first scroll of Genesis is allowing God's people to know the deepest layers of their origin. It is giving the beginning its true dimension. And perhaps that is exactly what history has always tried to tell us between the lines, that silence, chaos, emptiness were not the beginning. They were the result of something before. Creation, as we know it, is, in fact, a reconstruction. And the Bible we have today, though sacred, is a partial version of what really happened. The first scroll was removed to protect religion, but now it resurfaces to restore the truth that existed before the light, before the Word, before the beginning. If this revelation burns in your heart as it does in so many who are awakening, then share it, not as a theory but as a quest, the quest for the forgotten origin, for the voice that was silenced, for the manuscript that still cries out silently in the hidden layers of history. The first scroll of Genesis is not dead. It has only been silenced. And now, finally, it is ready to be heard again. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now and activate the bell, because here we will continue to expose what has been silenced for centuries. And if you want to go deeper with us, become a member of the channel. This helps us continue this mission. Now tell me in the comments, do you believe that there are still hidden truths within the Bible itself?